Hi, everybody. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Paul Spadoni, the author of An American Family in Italy, and I believe without permission, correct?
Right. Living the La Dolce Vita without permission.
So it's a fantastic story, and in hindsight, I wish I had done something like this years ago. My wife was even saying we should have bought something when the kids were young, but we're considering it now. But before we get to the book, a little bit about your background and your Italian roots. Where's your family from?
Sure. I grew up in a small town called Gig Harbor, Washington, and in the early 1900s, it had a lot of immigrants. There were Croatian immigrants on one side, and then there were Swedish and Norwegians on the other. And my dad had a very different experience growing up because he had to go to the school with the Swedes and the Norwegians. And he and his brothers and sisters had a difficult time in school because they were bullied quite a bit, so much so that my poor aunt, my dad's sister, started school 3 times before she made it through first grade because it was just tough for her. By the time she was her third year, she was going to school with my dad, so they had at least 2 of them there. But it was so difficult that my grandmother had to go to the school and get my dad and his sister dismissed from school early so they could get a head start on the walk home because most of the bullying came after school was out. Anyhow, it was a time when it was to be a foreigner was looked down upon. Everybody wanted to be proud that they were American. So my dad grew up, only speak English in the house, which is kind of why we never learned Italian when we were young. And he was, you'd ask him, he was American, and that's because that was the emphasis then. When I grew up in the 50s and 60s, it was now a time to be really proud to be Italian Americans. We had movie stars, singers, baseball players, boxers, racers, all these people that we were, it was great to be Italian American because we were heroes in so many different areas. So I grew up real proud to be Italian. My best friends were all my cousins because I had like 25 cousins living in Gig Harbor. And we were the little Italy of Gig Harbor. There were no other Italian families other than ones that we had married into there. So we had huge family gatherings, and I just sort of took that all for granted. I just thought this was the way everybody families was. But I realized as I grew up, I started to appreciate how cool it was, not only to be Italian, but to be part of this Italian family that was so great. I had my aunts and uncles and my cousins to be examples for me. And so I grew up very proud of being Italian American, and I very much wanted to go to Italy when I got older. I even considered majoring in Italian in college, realizing that was not too practical a career. I ended up majoring in journalism instead. And then family got in the way. I had marriage, I had 4 kids, I had to raise those, and so it's going to be, it took a while. It wasn't until my 40s that I was able to go to Italy.
Well, that's great. I mean, we went to Italy for the first time when we were in our 40s, 20 something years ago, but I didn't know what I know now. And I really wish I did. And even with that, we didn't get to see enough of the country to really feel the essence of it.
Yeah.
But I have to ask you because it's obvious. Gig Harbor, Washington is not the first place you think of when you talk about Italian immigration. So how'd the family wind up there?
My grandfather, he first went to Chicago, worked in an iron foundry, and that was terrible hot work. Heard about a job as a cook on a train crew that went around repairing train tracks. And he was not trained as a cook, but he's Italian. So, Italian men grow up knowing how to cook. So he said, yeah, I can cook. And as they were traveling around the country, they came to Washington. And when he got to Washington, he heard about a brick factory that was starting up near Eatonville, Washington. And he had made bricks in Montecarlo. So he quit the train crew and went up and started making bricks. When he came across in 1903, his occupation was listed as peasant. Then it was crossed out and they put laborer, kind of political correctness there, Mm-hmm. When he went back, then he worked for 5 years and he went back and married my grandmother. When he came back across, his occupation was listed as engineer. That is like an operating engineer in a brick factory. So he had, come up hill. And then he got a job in Tacoma. There were a lot of Italian immigrants in Tacoma. He got a job at a smelter and commuted to Gig Harbor across the water. So that's how we ended up being a small Italian American community in Gig Harbor, but across the Narrows was Tacoma, which had a large Italian American community.
Oh, that's a cool story. So I'll tell you one quick little funny story about an Italian cook. My cousin Mike, he went to Vietnam. He gets off the plane or whatever boat, whatever in Vietnam, and they ask you who knows how to cook. He had no idea how to cook. Raised his hand. They sent him to the kitchen. The sergeant, the mess sergeant tells him, do this, this, and this. Yeah, I don't know how to do that. He goes, I thought you said you could cook. I can't, but I figured it was better than being shot at. He spent a
Exactly.
year in Vietnam in the officer's mess. So not only we're good cooks, we're fast thinkers too, right?
That's right.
Uh, so yeah, that's a really cool story. And to your point about, the family, I always tell people I felt like I had nine mothers and fathers because all my aunts and uncles,
Yeah,
they were just like your parents. They corrected you when you needed correcting, and they were there for you when you
yeah.
needed something. So now I'm gonna probably obvious, but I'll ask the question anyway. Now, have you researched back to Tuscany, and have you found anything really interesting there? I was probably did because you're there all the time, but
Yeah. So what happened is I really wanted to go to Italy. So I was a teacher at the time. I started out as a journalist, ended up teaching journalism in English. And I wanted to go so badly that I applied for a leave of absence for my teaching job for a year. And I bought one-way tickets to Italy for me and my wife and my two teenage daughters. I had two other children that were already out of college and then working. And I just wanted to go, and I was going to go there. I had the crazy idea that I could go there a week before my wife and daughters and find an apartment and find a job because I tried to find one remotely, but I was not able to do it. So I just said, okay, I'm going to go there anyhow. Well, that would have been impossible. Don't do that. Okay, don't do what I tried to do. Luckily, over the summer, I was able to find a job beforehand, and the teacher or the headmaster at the school was a British and Italian school. He found me an apartment too. So I had a job and I had an apartment before we went there. But before that, my colleagues thought I was crazy. It's like they'd ask me questions like, "Do you have a job?" No, I don't have a job. I'm going to look for one. Well, do you speak Italian? Well, very little, yeah, but I'll learn it when I go there. Where will you live? Well, I'll look on the classified ads for an apartment. Um, how about your daughters? They're in high school. What are they going to do? Well, they'll have to take school correspondence courses or online courses. Thankfully, I was able to find this job, and my wife was 100% behind me. She's so supportive. But my daughters argued, rebelled. They begged and cried, leave us here with our friends. But that was not an option. Now, ever after that, they thanked us many, many times for that year they spent. It was like an unforgettable year. During that time, I started doing some research on the family history, but it wasn't until we started going there after I retired from teaching that I really started to dig into that. And um, because I spent that year in Italy teaching, I really wanted to go back. It was not enough for me. It hadn't satisfied my thirst, partly because had to speak English all day and I wasn't really, learning Italian very well. So when we came back from that, I looked into every way I could to retire early. And I was able to retire at age 57. And Lucy and I embarked on a little experiment. We would go back to Italy for about 3 months at a time. And we're going to do this for like 3 to 5 years and decide, okay, is this something we want to keep doing? Go here for 3 to 5 months or 3 months at a time? Or will we say, okay, we've had enough of Italy. We did that. Or will we say, hey, maybe we should just move here? And we ended up deciding that 3 months was about right. So after we did that for 5 years, we decided to buy a house. The town we had decided to move in was Montecarlo, with the nice tower that you see behind you. And that is where my grandparents came from. And we moved there partly because of that, but also because it met all of our requirements. It's a beautiful hilltop town. It's alive and vibrant. It has a train nearby. Not very many people speak English there, and that's something we wanted. We didn't want to go to Italy and just become part of an expat community. We've met people who lived there for 20 years and they hardly speak any Italian because all their friends are British and American. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to learn Italian. As I got there, I started doing research, and this could go on for a long time here, Bob. If you have any other questions you want to ask, I'll start
No,
getting into
keep,
them.
no, keep going. I'm
Keep going.
fascinated.
Okay. So we did know some people on my grandfather's side, the Spadoni side. So I had some start on that history. I knew my obviously my grandfather's name, my great grandfather, and my great great grandfather. But that was it. And all my relatives there had no interest in going any farther. Then I was like, well, we've lived here a long time. We don't know that, it was, so it was up to me to do the research. I would go to the churches and ask, well, do you have like baptism records? Because as you know, and probably a lot of your viewers know, you can't really go back beyond 1860 or so on the civic records. It's church records that really show the baptism. So all the churches would say, yeah, all the baptism and marriage records are kept in a central archive in Pescia. So I went to Pescia, and first I got the kind of brush off, like, well, we're real busy, come back later. Finally, I got a priest who took me out on the street, and he said, see that building down there about 2 blocks away? Like, doesn't have any name on it or address, but it used to be a monastery, and that's where the archives are. And if you come here on Wednesday at 4 o'clock, they'll be open for about 2 hours. And so I went there and found an archivist who was volunteered, and he opened them. There were probably about 5 Italian people in there who were doing research on their own. And the cool thing is I don't think this is common, but you can actually open the books, the actual baptism records, yourself and look through them. And so the first thing I did is the archivist helped me find my grandfather's birth, because it's important to start from the latest person born, because it's when you find his birth record, it says the name of his mother, the name of his father, and his grandfather. And I didn't realize how important that was, but I found 4 Enrico Spadonis that were born within about 10 years of each other because of the way Italians name their children. They often name their children after the grandfather. So if the grandfather was Enrico and he had 4 children, then their first sons were going to be named Enrico. So it's really important to know that Enrico Spadoni, who his father is, who his grandfather is. With that, I found the names of my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, and I could go back. Then you'd go back anywhere from 20 to 40 years, and you'd find the birth record of the other one. And at first, the archivist would help me because all I could read was Spadoni in it, and the baptism record. And then he'd go and show me the other names, and I gradually got better and better at reading all the rest of it. But it took me a while, and he was very patient with me. And so by doing that, I was eventually able to trace the Spadoni family back to as early as they had records was in the 1400s.
Wow, that's awesome.
Really
That's great.
lucky because, they had lived there the whole time. And so that was amazing to me. And the first thing I did is just trace my line back. And then I realized, well, there's a lot of other Spadonis living in this area around Pescia, Montecarlo, Ponte Bugenese. I wonder how we're related. Then I met a few of them, and they all said, we don't know how we're related. And so I went back and I recorded every Spadoni baptism from the 1500s onward up to this records are only available through like 1900. From there, now I'm able to meet another Spadoni in that area and find out who their grandfather or maybe great grandfather was and which city they were born in. And I can look on my computer and show how we're related then. And I've done that now. I've made some cold calls on people named Spadoni and said, hey, I'm Paul Spadoni from America. I'm like doing a genealogy. I'd like to know how we're related. And without fail, I've been able to go back and look at my files and find out how we're related. So I've probably met a dozen Spadoni families there, given them a little chart that shows how they're related to me, how their family dates back to the 1400s, and it's been real cool now to do that. On my
That's great.
grandmother's side, we had completely lost track of our relatives. My grandmother was, her surname was Sigietti, and I was able to make contact with them, but we didn't know how we were related. They didn't even know how they were related to each other, because there's a street that the Sigaris have been living on since probably the 1300s, and there's a number of families there with the same surname who don't know how they're related unless they're like, first or second cousins. And in this case, I was lucky enough to find that since the Sigaris had been there so long, they were a founding family of Montecarlo. There's a town historian, and he has done research on all the founding families and has to come up with family trees. So he was able to give me a family tree that dated back to the 1200s for the Sigari family, and he'd done that for a number of other Sigari families in the area. So then we were able to put that together and see how we were related. And so I made a big chart that shows how these different Sigari families are related. I can just show you the overall picture here, but down at the bottom is all the Sigari families that are in Italy, America, France, even some that are in South America. And I was able to give this chart to all the people on the street. So now they all, if they really care, can look on that chart and see how they're related.
Wow, that's so cool. That's unbelievable. I mean, I know from my research, it had to take a lot of time and a lot of patience, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. It's like putting together a big jigsaw puzzle. So
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you have to be part detective and go down some of these rabbit holes. I had same thing, I would just Facebook people that had the same last name as my grandmother and things. And I got contacted by somebody in Italy one time, and this is several years ago, Alessio DiPaolo, and he said, my your great grandfather is my grandfather. Now he's in his 20s or something like that, and I'm in my 60s, and I'm like, how could this be? I never heard that name before. But what happened was my great grandfather was 60. My great grandmother died when she was 42. He was 60 and he married a woman 30 and
Okay.
had two children with her. They were born in their 20s, around the same time as my father. And their children had, so this whole thing came together. And just before we went, I got a call from his uncle saying he lives near Naples. He's going to meet me. And people have heard this now, probably 5 or 6 times I've told the story, but he took me to the home of my dad's first cousins, both in their 90s, who I never knew existed.
Wow. Oh,
And
cool.
so the rush is, and that's why I tell people first of all, if you go to Italy, if you go to Rome, that's fine, but you have to find the hometown. You have to go to the hometown, even
Right.
if you don't do the research like you're going to do, or like I want to do, just to walk those streets and know that there was family was there. I've talked to people who said, I saw somebody who looked like my uncle. And they,
Yeah.
they approach them and they say, they find out they have the same last name, or they mention the name. Oh, I know. Go down the street. They live over there.
Yeah.
So that's incredible to be able to get back that far. I mean, I was able to do it with my grandmother's family because it was all recorded in history, but to be able to do that, that's fantastic. So now I want to talk about you taking this leap of faith with two teenage girls, which I could just imagine. I mean, the book really outlines it pretty clearly, and having to navigate around the language, the trains, the schools, the work. I mean, how did this all come together? And I know you have a couple of
Well,
stories about it. I think the train and I think one about going to get some paperwork done, right?
oh yeah, we tried to get our permesso di soggiorno. Well, first of all, I didn't actually have permission to work there. The headmaster of the school, he was a little bit loose on the regulations, and he just needed somebody for 1 year to fill in for a teacher who had quit suddenly. So he said, well, really, we should get the work permit. He says, but that's so difficult. He says, just tell them that you're coming there for vacation. Now, this was pre 9/11, and so they weren't quite as checking things as much. So he said, just come and tell them that you're a tourist there. And yes, now I know you can only stay for 3 months at a time, but I don't even know if they stamped our passports when we came in through Rome. Sometimes they didn't do that at that time. We had no problem staying for 10 months. And he paid me cash. I'd come in at the end of the month and he'd open a drawer and take out a bunch of money and give him my pay. I always wondered, maybe he had like a gun on top of that wad of cash he had in his drawer. Who knows? But I was able to work that way, and he found me an apartment. Um, so that part worked out amazingly. But again, there's no way. I think my book, I say, is more of a how not to do book than a how to do book, because you can't repeat what I do and say, hey, I'm going to do what Paul did. Well, you can't stay for more than 3 months. You probably can't get a job the way I did and find an apartment. You'd have to go through a lot more red tape. But we did try to get a permesso di soggiorno, and we went 6 times to the questura and finally gave up because of the requirements they were trying to make us go through. Well, I realized later that if you just go to a different questura, you'd probably be okay, because we found so many times that we'd go to one official and they'd say, oh, no, no, that can't be done. And then you'd go to another one, could be in the same office, and they'd say, oh, yeah, no problem. It happened when Lucy tried to get her bus pass. We tried to get a monthly bus pass, and they went up and said, oh, no, no, you can't get this without a permesso di soggiorno. And I already had mine because I'd been there a week earlier. So I said, look, there's another clerk. There's 2 lines there. We're just going to go through the other line, and I'll put the money out and the form out, just like that. Hoping the clerk was 5 feet away wasn't going to look over and say, hey, we just said you can't do that. But so we ran into that kind of red tape. We got our monthly bus passes. We had lots of misadventures on trains. One time we got on a train going the wrong direction. Another time, one of my older daughter was going to come visit us, and she was cutting in the middle of the night, and we thought, well, what if she's asleep? So I asked permission to the conductor. Can I just go through as like a little train with like 4 cars? Can I just go through and see if my daughter's on there asleep? And he said, sure. So I ran through and looked, no, she's not there. The next train pulled in, and it was a little bit longer. So I got on, and the train started up with me on it. So there I am going somewhere. No ticket. She's not on the train. And the train went for about 20 minutes before it stopped. I had to get off and at this station at like 4 in the morning, and it was freezing to death because it was December. And then I had to get back on again, and I hid in the bathroom so they wouldn't ask me for my ticket. Got back to Ottawa.
Oh,
So
that's all
anyhow, we
right.
did a lot of things wrong, but it was just unforgettable experience. It's a great time. We remember those. We'll remember those forever.
Well,
I,
we started the trip in Rome, and I booked the fast train from Rome to Naples, more for the experience than anything else. I wanted to take the what's it Franco Rosa, whatever it is, and uh, so we get there about, I don't know, 45 minutes before the train's supposed to leave, and I look up at the board, and everything is delayed. Everything going south is delayed, right? 30
mm-hmm.
minutes. So 30 minutes. All right. We're sitting there. Now it goes to everything's 45 minutes late, 60 minutes late, right? My wife and kid, they're all getting impatient. We're going to go upstairs, see if there's something. We're going to go get something, whatever. So why don't you, I said, well, you go, I'll stay here. Let me just keep an eye on this board, because I don't know what this Italian instinct I had, but it's something told me stay there.
Yeah.
So, and I have tons of suitcases and everything. So they go upstairs, and my wife texts me and said, there's seats up here. Why don't you come up? I said, no, I'm going to drag all this stuff. I said, I'll just stay here. Now
Yeah.
it's like 90 minutes, right? But I'm watching our track and our train, and it's not coming up delayed. It's not coming up with a track. There's nothing there. The train was supposed to leave at 4. At 3:50, they put up a track number,
Okay.
track
That's
10 or
hopeful.
whatever it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I said, the train's
Yeah.
leaving at 4 o'clock. I said, you gotta run, right? So they get down there, we grab all this luggage, we go to get through we're trying to get through the turnstiles and everything, and we got the tickets flying every place. And he goes, "Go, go, what train? Go, go." We
Go.
get on the train. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes waiting for it to leave. It finally leaves, and it took 3 hours to get to Naples because the fast track was closed. So we're on the
Okay.
local track, and it took forever. But that was our train experience. And we took one other train, which was fine. It was a slow train to Calabria, and we knew how long it was going to take, and we didn't have anything planned, so it wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I think the moral of the story is uh, you never know what's going to happen on the trains, the planes, or ferries in Italy.
Yeah. Oh,
So
so that, yeah, I guess one other story I can share is when we were going to Sicily, and one train was delayed, and by the time we got to the train actually goes across the bridge to Sicily. They put the train on it. Well, we got so delayed that by the time we got there, no, that the last station is a little station. I can't remember the name of the city, but it was too late to catch that. And we said, well, what are we going to do to the guy in the station? He was disgusted because the stations ahead had just, and the conductors on the train said, oh, don't worry, don't worry. Just deal with it when you get there. And he said, they should have told me that you were coming and you had tickets all the way to Sicily. And we said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, well, here's a waiting room. Well, it's cold. It has like one cement bench. And there's no way. I said, there's no way we can wait there. Well, what we find out is if this situation happened, that they're required to put you up in a hotel. He wanted to go home because it was closing time. And so he was disgusted with the other, people that hadn't told him ahead of time that we were coming. He didn't want to do it, but he realized that that was his job. So finally, he did find us a hotel, which the hotel didn't want to put him up because they were probably going to have to wait months before Train Italia would actually reimburse them for the hotel. It's like, no, no, we don't. And he's like insisting, you have to do this. So he got us a hotel room and we stayed, and then we're able to go across the next day. But we had to be pretty persistent because he just was going to have us sleep in the waiting room overnight.
yeah, I give us a waiting room with nobody else, nobody there, right?
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Nobody there, and it's just how the Italian buildings are kind of they're made out of brick and cement. They're not warm, so it would have been pretty cold.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about how did your daughters get along with the Italians? Did they go to school there? Did they have activity? What did they do that they now are so grateful that you did this, that you dragged them there?
Well, so at first, as I said, they were like dead set against it. We tried to have them, take some Italian lessons beforehand, and it's like, oh no, we'll just learn it on the airplane, It's that then they're on the airplane. It's like, well, it's too late now. Um, so they first started out. They were going to. They were doing some courses online at the school where I had because we had computers. But after about 2 weeks, they started to realize, well, we've like explored the town, but we don't know anybody here. So they said, I think we want to go to the Italian school, the Italian high school. So we went to one Italian high school and they said, no, no, it's impossible. You don't have the permesso di soggiorno. You can't. We went to another high school and they said, oh, we'd love to have you. Yeah. So they did all the paperwork and we got them in the school. Now, that was good because they met a lot of friends. They were in a school that had a track for tourism. And so these people who were going to be in the tourist business were learning English. So some of them spoke pretty good English, but most of the classes were in Italian. So they were there to, meet Italian people, to have fun, not to learn. the other people who were there were immigrants from, say, Romania, other countries in Eastern Europe, and they were there because it was an opportunity for them to improve their lives. So they were trying to learn Italian fast. Susie and Lindsay were there just to meet people. They didn't care what grades they got or how much they learned. And plus, they couldn't speak any Italian, so they didn't understand, 90% of what was said. So they would try to like read their Italian books so that they could learn Italian. And the teacher said, no, you pay attention. You can't be reading something else. It was really boring for them to go to school, but they did make some really good friends. So that was an important part of it. And once they started making friends, they were able to go out at night on the weekends. We had to be really flexible because, Italians, when they go out at night, they start at maybe 11 or 12 o'clock. That's when things start. That's when they'd be home if they were in America. It's like, well, you can go out from, 8 o'clock to 11, but be home by 11:30. In Italy, if you're going to have friends and go out for fun, it's like, well, we're leaving at 11:30 and we'll be back at 3 o'clock. We met their friends and they found out that they were really nice people. They were very trustworthy. They said, no, we'll take care of Susie and Lindsay. Don't worry about a thing. They still have a friend there, Erica, that they're still good friends with. So she was wonderful. Susie said, I wouldn't have admitted it by the end of the year, the time we were there, that it was really had been a good experience, because then I would have had to admit that I was wrong. All my crying and complaining was, you were right, Dad. But it took her about a year after she was back, and she realized, I didn't really miss a thing. They had advanced so much in their maturity and their experiences that they realized their friends were still kind of provincial. And, they felt like they had learned so much from their friends there, and for all the traveling and the different experiences, that it was just a great time. So it didn't happen. It didn't happen until about the end, and even then, it took them like a year to admit that it was the greatest year of their lives.
So I have to ask, when you got back after that year, at what point did they tell you that they missed it?
It wasn't for at least 6 months to a year that they told me what a great time they had. And they said a lot of it was like meeting with their friends back here, and they thought they had missed so much, and they said, we really didn't miss that much. And our friends, they're not as confident about, traveling and going different places, meeting new people. We just feel like we've, matured years from that one year there, and our friends have barely changed at all.
Well, it's a whole different learning experience for high school girls, because you can't teach that.
Yeah.
That's a once in a lifetime experience to be able to live in another country and to do that. I mean, we lived in England for 2 years. I mean, we were grown-ups. My son was only a baby, but you can't compare the experience of a visit to someplace to actually living there.
That's true.
I don't think we were back 2 days, and we were walking down the street. My wife said, "Why are we here? I miss it so much." And I was shocked that she told me that, because she was so concerned about going, and we were only going for 2 weeks. And that's just a super, super experience. So now, do you go on just a regular visa now, or do you have a retirement or your citizenship?
No, we don't have actually a visa, because we only stay for 3 months at a time. We go usually like March, April, May, and then again in September, October. So we don't stay for longer. Now, I would have no problem because I got my dual citizenship, so I could go.
Okay, so you do have it, yeah.
I could go on, an Italian passport. And actually, when we bought our house in Monte Carlo in 2015, we applied for residency. So technically, we're residents of Monte Carlo now. We have a permesso di soggiorno, or not a permesso di, well, Lucy has a permesso di soggiorno, and we have a carta di identità for living there. So I think we may be able to stay longer if we showed that, but we're not going to push it, because I don't know. We really, being residents of Monte Carlo, but we're only there for 4 or 5 months a year. I'm not sure how that all works out. We're still residents of the United States and of Italy. But in any event, we don't test that. We just go for 3 months and then 3 months in the spring, maybe 2 months in the fall.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're trying to decide. I mean, we're hoping to go back in September and go to, we went to Campania and Calabria and places like that. We didn't go to Puglia where my mom's family is from. So I want to go there. And I found out that from my dad's family, I have cousins in Toronto, which is just, it's about an hour to where my my grandfather are from in Torito. Uh, so we're hoping to do that. And then, like you said, maybe we'll see if we find something to rent for 3 months if we decide to do that and try it out. And then,
That's what we did at first. We rented for 3 months at a time on agriturismo, kind of during the low season, so they gave us a special rate. And one of the reasons we decided to buy is because this agriturismo was great, but we're kind of in the country down at the bottom of Monte Carlo, and we're not meeting people. You go for a walk and you're in the country. There's a farmer out in the field, and you wave to him, and that's about it when you take a walk. When we bought inside the walls of Monte Carlo, now you go for a walk, you see the store owners, the restaurant owners. The castle at the end is a friend of ours, the guy who owns the castle now, and it's just a totally different experience living inside the city than living out in the country. So I would highly recommend that
yeah,
you get in the city.
yeah, that's what we want to do. Well, my wife wants us to look out one window and see the ocean, the sea, and the other window and see the mountains. So that's going to be a challenge, but not so much in Calabria because they are there. But of course, those are the
Yeah.
most expensive places. So the tower's behind me. Where do you live in relationship to the tower?
That's about maybe 3 American blocks away.
Oh, so
So I'm
close.
trying to
Nice.
figure out, yeah, which way you're looking at it from. Yeah, so actually that picture was probably taken from the castle, the fortress, and then down there's the church tower is what you see behind you. Our house would be kind of about 3 blocks down that on the right side. That's the main street of Monte Carlo. So um, yeah, we're right there in the center of town.
And so whose castle is it? Whose castle was it?
It was one time the Medici owned the castle and expanded it. It was built started in the 1200s, it added on in the 1300s, and then the Medici family in the maybe 14 or 1500s added on to it. So it's been added on to a number of times. It's privately owned now, which is actually a good thing because the family is wealthy enough to take care of it. I don't know if the city had it, they would be able to
Yeah.
maintain it as well as the family. And they open it for tours on weekends. And so it's a great relationship between the city and the owners because they privately maintained but open to the public at certain times. I do need to digress a little bit and tell you about one of the most special experiences we had. It was just this last summer, Bob, that because I had made contact with so many relatives in Italy. And then I was able to find out many Spadoni and Sigeri families who had come to the United States, how we were related, contacting them through Facebook and Ancestry.com. And I have a blog. So some of them read my blog and said, hey, I think we might be related. So I met many people, only online in the United States, that are Spadoni or Sigeri. Then a big group of Sigeri families in France contacted me and wanted to know. They found out for the first time from reading my blog that they were from Monte Carlo originally, and they wanted to know how they were related. And we were able to place almost all of those French people in the family tree. So since then, we've had a few family reunions in Italy and some in America. This summer, I fulfilled a lifelong dream, a dream since I started to go to Italy, is to have a big family reunion in Italy, in Monte Carlo, Pescia, Ponte Buginese, where our ancestors came from, that little region. And we had about 20 people from France come, about maybe 25 or 30 from the United States come, and probably about 30 relatives from Italy coming to various dinners, tours. It was a week-long event. So we toured places where the churches where our ancestors were baptized. There's a street called Via Spadoni in one of the towns. There's a city where the Spadonis originated. We took tours to all these places and had like 4 or 5 meals together. It was amazing. You have people there speaking French, Italian, English, trying to communicate, using some common languages when they can. Some of the French speak some Italian. I speak some Italian. We had one of my cousins there is a tour guide operator, so she did a lot, and she can speak French, English, and Italian fluently.
it was just an incredible time. All of my relatives, some relatives from the United States, we had met from the first time because we only met, on the phone or Facebook friends. And so they came, um, meeting some of their relatives that are closer there in Italy. There was one that was really especially kind of poignant because Italo was his grandfather had been a martyr, so there's a street named after him, and he didn't even realize he had these relatives in California, and so I was able to introduce them, and he was able to show how his grandfather, where he had been killed by the Nazis,
Wow.
excuse me, the fascists, and so they were like all in tears at the end of that time because they had met for the first time, found out what one of their ancestors' brothers had gone through. It was a it was a really cool time, and I'm sure we'll have a couple more reunions too. But that was real special.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. I tried to get some of my relatives. I told them, anybody wants to come on this trip with us and we're going to go here and there. No, nobody wanted to go. So that's
Yeah,
fantastic that you did that. Uh, Especially to, have a week together. That must
yeah,
have been really, really, really special.
it was.
Yeah, I mean, on our trip, we spent, over the course of 2 weeks, I guess we spent like 4 or 5 days with my cousin Chintzia, who's actually a fourth cousin. But she helped me so much with my grandmother's father's family and connecting with the Pirmalo family. And she knew all the places in Calabria. And we still have, they took me to two homes, one in Montebello and one in Fasado that were owned by my third great grandparents. And one of them, somebody lives in part of it. The other part is kind of, I guess, apartments. The other one is still intact. It's a big stone building. It's owned by a doctor. He's owned it, I think, since 1960, or his family owned it since the 60s. But to your point, it's in such disrepair. It's sad. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, the town wanted to buy it a few years ago, and he doesn't want to sell it. And I think that's, they probably plans were to fix it up and maybe use it as a hotel or something like that. And the funny story about that was they took me there or took us there, and they had this big picnic outside, um, all homemade food from the region and things like that. And we're on this guy's property now, right in front of the palazzo. And at one point I said, doesn't he care that we're hanging out on this property here for 4 or 5 hours, whatever it was? And they said, oh, he's probably watching and he'll probably come over at some point. And towards the end of the day, he actually did come over and they said who we were. And he asked, he was talking to them in Italian, of course. I didn't understand it. He wants to know if you want to go inside. I said, do I?
Oh,
Of
cool.
course I do. But we could only go a little bit in because a lot of the plaster was falling off the walls and the steps were dicey and things like that. But
Yeah.
you could see what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
You got the idea of the frescoes on the ceilings and the walls and things like that, of how grand it must have been. So it was bittersweet,
Yeah.
to be in the home of your third great grandparents and see it in one state and then knowing what it was probably like before.
Right.
And my cousin she's found there were those two places. There was another place that they took me to in um Massa di Soma in Campania. There was another place supposedly at the seaside somewhere in Calabria, and then they had another place in Messina, Sicily. So they had these, and the thing about Messina, it was 3 blocks from the ferry, and I only found out about it after we got back. And that place was apparently is still in pretty decent shape.
Yeah.
But
Well, you'll have to go back.
oh yeah, no, and like I said, I want to go back to where my mom's family is from. I don't know if I may have distant relatives there, but um, my cousins from my oldest uncle were all born in Italy. They only came over in 1950 because
Mm-hmm.
my grandparents left my uncle there when they came over. He was 2 years old, and they left him with his grandparents. And he told the story. He didn't want to come because that was his family.
Yeah.
And then when he was old enough to come, the war broke out. And then after the war, it was very hard for him to come, and they had to come through Canada. And they spent like 5 years in Canada before they could
Wow.
come to the States.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many stories like that. But for anybody who wants to know how not to move to Italy, give us the name of the book again and where people could find it, and your website and your blog and everything.
Okay, the book is An American Family in Italy, Living La Dolce Vita Without Permission. And I have a blog called Living with Abroad in Tuscany, and that my wife named that. And so we started that in 2011 when we started coming to Italy regularly. Now it has probably it's approaching 600 entries, and it has over 500,000 page views. And a lot of it just details our life when we started going to Tuscany, going to Montecarlo. And then there's a lot of other articles in it that are just generally on Italian culture that are some of the actual more well-read ones. I have one that gets a lot of page views. It's called "What Does It Mean to Be Called a Wop or Dago, and Is It Offensive?" And a lot of people have misconceptions about the origin of the words "wop" and "dago," and I wrote about that, and it's like high on the search engines now. I also wrote about Italians and their superstitions. Is bottom pinching legal in Italy? Tackling Italian bathroom mysteries, basically like the bidet and why there's these little pool chains in the Italian hotels. I've written about genetic diversity and DNA testing of Italians. And widely read one is what will happen if you don't pay your traffic ticket in Italy, because so many people get tickets from for going into the limited traffic zones or for speeding. But then they can get tickets. They can go past like 4 or 5 cameras and get 4 or 5 tickets in one day
Oh, wow.
because they get they're in a limited traffic zone. It says ZTL, Zona Traffico Limitato, and they don't understand that, and so they drive past that. There's a picture taken of their license plate, and then they get a ticket in the mail, like probably 10 months later, in Italian, and they have to try to figure out why they got this and what it is, and if they should pay it. So a lot has been written about that.
What's the fine for something like that? How many euros is it?
In some of the cities, it's only like 80 euros, and some of them it's like 200 euros. And then it says something like if you pay it within 10 days, it's this much, but if you don't pay it, then it doubles. My general advice is that you should pay it. A lot of people just regard it as part of the expenses of being a tourist in Italy, something you have to learn. Other people are like adamant that no, I shouldn't have to pay this because how am I expected to know? Read these signs in Italian. So people go in all directions, but I just generally I've gotten them. I pay them. I have 2 cousins there that are cops, so how can I be a lawbreaker? They're going to read my blog and say, "What?
You
You're
didn't
telling
pay his
people not
fine,
to pay
okay.
them?" Although the bottom line is that they really can't collect from Americans if they choose not to pay. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in another country. You should
yeah,
follow the rules.
the ignorance of the law, there's no excuse in America, and it should be the same way in other countries too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, listen, Paul, this has been great fun. I really, really appreciate it. This was the second try. I think we tried 3 years
A couple of
ago.
years ago,
And we had the problem, but we finally got to do it. So we want to make sure everybody reads the book and checks out your blog.
Okay, thanks so much, Bob. I really enjoyed talking to you. Hey, if
Great.
you're going to come to Monte Carlo when we're there, that'd be great to see you too.
I'll let you know for
You're
sure.
invited.